Number 1.
Bradley was last seen in Phoenix, Arizona on November 10, 1995. His Centennial Middle School classes were cancelled due to Veterans Day, but he didn't tell his mother. Instead, he left home as if to go to school and rode his mountain bike to visit a 13-year-old friend and classmate, Jeremy Bach, at Bach's home at Owatuki Custom Estates in the 3200 block of East Piro Street. Bradley's mother later realized it was a school holiday and she paged him to find out where he was. He never answered the page and he wasn't at home when she returned from work. She reported him missing that evening. When questioned about Bradley's disappearance, Bach said they had been playing with guns and Bradley accidentally fired a shot into the wall, then panicked and fled on his bike. Bradley's case was classified as a runaway for the next 2 months until sanitation workers noticed bloodstains on the top and sides of the Bach family's trash container. Investigators subsequently found 2 inches of blood and body fluids in the bottom of the container, as well as bloodstains in Bach's kitchen. When confronted with the evidence, Bach admitted he'd shot Bradley in the chest and put his body in the trash container, which was then taken to the Butterfield Station landfill. Bach said the shooting was an accident. He told several different stories about how the accident supposedly happened. Authorities launched a 2-month search of the landfill at the cost of $100,000 but found no evidence. Investigators didn't believe Bach's story and theorized he killed Bradley during an argument over a girl they had both dated. He admitted that he never tried to summon help after the shooting and said Bradley took over an hour to die. In February 1996, he was charged with murder. He would become the youngest person to face trial as an adult in Arizona. The alleged murder weapon belonged to Bach's stepfather, and Bradley's parents sued him, claiming he hadn't stored his firearms properly and may have also helped Bach dispose of the body. The case was settled out of court. In January 1998, Bach was convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to the maximum term of 22 years in prison. A photo of him is posted with this case summary. Bradley's body has never been found.
Number 2.
Joan was last seen in King County, Washington on August 10, 1962. She planned to meet her sisters at the World's Fair in Seattle, Washington, but never arrived. She was talking on the phone with a friend, Patricia Martin, and suddenly said, "Oh my God, he's in the basement. He's coming." Joan screamed and the line went dead. Martin repeatedly called Joan back, and at first no one answered the phone. After several attempts, Joan's estranged husband, Robert Milton Bob Hansen, came on the line. Martin asked where Joan was and Robert said, "She's with you." Joan has never been heard from again, and all her belongings were left behind except a blue sequined dress, one of her favorite outfits. Joan's Chevrolet Biscayne was found abandoned weeks after her disappearance in the Queen Anne Hill neighborhood of Seattle. The windows were rolled down, the tires were flat, and the interior was dusty, filthy and cluttered with debris such as empty bottles, food wrappers and cigarette butts. There were no usable fingerprints, no signs of foul play, and no indication of Joan's whereabouts. She normally kept her car in a neat and clean condition. An extensive search of the area turned up no sign of her, and a private detective her parents hired was also unable to locate her. Joan married a man she'd went to school with and had 2 children by him, but her first marriage ended in divorce after the couple's daughter died of sudden infant death syndrome, SIDS, and Joan had an affair with another man. During this period she was hospitalized briefly for emotional problems caused by the stress in her life. After her divorce, in either 1956 or 1957, she married Robert, who made a living as a carpenter and fisherman. They had 2 sons and 1 daughter during the first 3 years of their marriage. Robert severely beat Joan's oldest son when he was about 6 years old, injuring the child so badly that he couldn't walk afterward. The boy stayed with Martin for 2 months, after which his father, Joan's ex-husband, filed for custody. Robert also physically abused Joan on a regular basis, even while she was pregnant, and the couple's children were afraid of him. She told Martin she was afraid for her life. Robert refused to let her tell the children about any of their relatives on her side of the family. They didn't even know about her oldest son. In May 1962, Joan moved in with Martin and went to an attorney, told him about the abuse, showed him her bruises and filed for divorce. She and Robert fought bitterly over the division of the family's assets, worth $300,000, and on August 8, Joan got a restraining order against him. The order required him to vacate the family home and let Joan move back into it. 2 days later, she disappeared. Robert reported her missing on August 15. Joan's attorney continued the divorce action in her absence. On November 21, the divorce was granted. Robert denied abusing Joan accused her of stealing $8,000 from him, and sought to keep all the property and assets. But the judge ruled there was sufficient evidence to indicate Joan had been abused by her husband. She was given 40% of the marital property, and Robert got 60%. The court ordered that if she did not return alive, her share would be held in trust for her children until they came of age. In spite of the court order, Joan's share of the property eventually came under Robert's control, and their children got nothing. Joan never used her social security number after her disappearance or left any other paper trail. She was declared legally dead in 1975. Robert raised their children alone after the divorce and made a fortune in the construction business and with rental properties he owned. He was arrested several times over the years for assaulting people and destroying property in anger. Once he advertised for a housekeeper and, when a woman responded to the ad, he kept her on his property against her will for 3 days before she escaped. Police briefly suspected he was the Green River Killer, a serial murderer of prostitutes who operated in the Seattle-Tacoma area and was responsible for numerous disappearances as well as homicides. The Green River Killer was eventually identified as Gary Leon Ridgway. Robert spent his later years traveling back and forth between Washington state and Costa Rica in Central America. He struck up relationships with women in that country and got married and divorced at last twice, possibly more times. He was denied Costa Rican citizenship, however, and eventually moved back to the United States for good. The Hansen children grew up believing Joan had abandoned them. Joan and Robert's daughter became addicted to drugs as a young adult and died of an overdose in the 1980s. Their 2 sons, who described Robert as an extremely abusive parent, now believe he murdered their mother. The police have long considered him a person of interest in her case. Robert committed suicide in his Auburn, Washington home in August 2009, leaving an estate worth $5 million. He was 84 years old. He never faced charges in his first wife's disappearance. In his will, Robert wrote Joan had disappeared years ago and, if she was alive, she was to inherit nothing. He also disinherited his children. By the time of his death, he'd been estranged from them for years. In December 2009, his sons filed a wrongful death suit against his estate, alleging he'd caused their mother's death. They were awarded $100,000 in damages. For years after her disappearance, there were rumors that Joan's body was buried beneath a barn on a farm in the Kent Valley along the Green River, on property the Hansen family had once owned. The barn had originally had a dirt floor, but a concrete floor was poured around the time of her disappearance. The building has since been demolished, and Kent-Des Moines Road now runs over where it used to be. In 2006, at Joan's son's request, investigators examined the road with ground-penetrating radar. No evidence was located, however. Joan's case remains unsolved. The noted true crime writer Ann Rule lived near the Hansen family in the 1960s. She didn't know Joan and didn't hear about her disappearance when it happened, but her children knew Joan's children and had gone to school with them. Rule profiled Joan's case in her 2009 book, Don't Look Behind You. And Other True Cases, the 15th book in her Crime Files series.
Number 3.
Risch was a homemaker in Lincoln, Massachusetts in 1961. She was married and had 2 children. The family had moved to Lincoln from Ridgefield, Connecticut about 7 months before. Her husband was out of town on a business trip on the day of her disappearance, October 24, 1961. She went with her 4-year-old daughter to the dentist that morning, cashed a check and went shopping. She returned home for lunch at 11 a.m., put her 2-year-old son in his crib for a nap. Her daughter played outside with a neighbor boy. At 1:55 p.m., Risch took her daughter and the neighbor boy to his parents' home and left them at the swing set in the yard without saying anything to the boy's parents. She told them she would be back, then returned home alone. At 2:15 p.m., a neighbor saw Risch standing next to her blue sedan outside the family's residence on Old Bedford Road. She was carrying something red and appeared to be dazed. This is the last time anyone saw Risch. Her daughter came home from the neighbors at 4 p.m., then immediately ran back to say that her mother was missing and red paint covered the kitchen walls. The paint turned out to be type O blood, Risch's type. The Risch's telephone had been ripped from the kitchen wall and thrown in a wastebasket. The wastebasket had been moved from the corner to the center of the room, and a nearby telephone book was found opened at the emergency numbers section. There was a single bloody thumbprint on the phone mount and 2 fingerprints and a partial palm print on the wall. They were not Risch's prints and have never been identified. The only other sign of a struggle was an overturned chair in the kitchen. Risch's son was still in his crib upstairs. The blood trail led from the baby's room to the kitchen and then outside to the Risch family driveway, where it stopped near her parked car. Blood drops were found on the hood and trunk of the car itself, but there were no bloody footprints inside on the kitchen floor. There was no sign of Risch herself inside the residence. Investigators thought there was about a pint of blood spread throughout the house. Someone had made efforts to clean up in the kitchen with paper towels and a pair of Risch's son's coveralls. Witnesses reported seeing an unidentified dirty blue-gray 1954 or 1955 sedan parked behind Risch's car in the Risch's driveway at 3:20 p.m. the day of the disappearance. Drivers also saw a woman walking along the road where Route 128 was under construction later in the day. No one stopped to assist the unidentified female, who was disheveled, appeared confused or dazed, and was holding something against her abdomen. Blood was running down the backs of her legs. After these initial reports, sightings of Risch ceased. She has never been heard from again. Risch's husband was in New York on October 24 for a business trip. He had left early that morning. He was questioned by investigators but was cleared of any involvement in her disappearance. Authorities did learn that Risch checked out over 25 library books during the previous summer, all of them related to murder or unexplained disappearances. Her husband described her as an avid reader who enjoyed suspense stories. Some people theorized that Risch chose to stage her own disappearance because she was unhappy with her life. She had worked in the publishing field in New York prior to her marriage. She chose to end her career to raise her family. Although many described her as a devoted mother who had a happy marriage and was deeply attached to her husband and children, some friends claimed Risch was very ambitious and was not fulfilled with her home life. Others speculated Risch was attacked and was suffering from amnesia as a result. Another hypothesis in the same vein is that Risch was not assaulted at all, but simply suffered an episode of some type and left her residence. Both of these theories could suggest the possibility that Risch wandered into a pit on the Route 128 construction site the night she disappeared and was unknowingly buried. She has no history of amnesiac experiences, however, and no history of mental illness in either herself or her family. Newspaper reports from 1961 state that Risch may have been sexually abused as a child. Another account stated that her parents died in a strange fire in New Jersey in 1940. When Risch was 9 years old, she was raised by an aunt and uncle after that. Both of these reports suggest that she may have had personal reasons for wanting to stage her disappearance. Risch was born in Brooklyn, New York, and graduated from Wilson College in Pennsylvania in 1952 with a degree in English. Her case remains open and unsolved.
Number 4.
Carolyn and her son, Mark Martin, were last seen on August 31, 1981. Her family and friends went to her home in Madison Heights, Michigan that day to help them pack. Carolyn was planning to take Mark and drive to San Antonio, Texas to be with her fiancé, Hamparsum Harry Carisian. Carisian stated he had gotten a job in Texas and wanted Carolyn and Mark to join him. She planned to travel in a caravan with her twin brother, Timothy, who was en route to Oklahoma to look for work. That evening, Carolyn stopped at her mother's home in Hazel Park, Michigan to say goodbye. She said her travel plans had changed. She would be taking a different route to Texas and would not travel with Timothy. Her family never saw her or Mark again. They filed a missing persons report for them the following spring. When questioned by police, Carisian said Carolyn changed her mind and decided she didn't want to go to Texas. He stated he let her and Mark out of the car, his own 1979 Pontiac Grand Prix, near Toledo, Ohio. Carolyn and Mark had only one suitcase with them. Carisian gave her $4,000 in cash, and she told him to discard her belongings, and he says this is the last time he saw her. Carisian said he continued on the way to Texas, but changed his mind and turned back when he had car trouble. He reappeared in Michigan a short time later. Since Carolyn and Mark disappeared, he has changed his name twice, and he has refused to take a polygraph test. He is now known as Harry Carisian. Carisian is Mark's father, but he had little contact with either his son or Carolyn until the summer of 1981, when Carolyn filed a paternity suit against him. In June 1981, the Macomb County Circuit Court ordered him to pay $30 a week in child support. Carolyn and Carisian reconciled after that, and he became a more involved father to Mark. Carolyn was looking forward to beginning a new life with Carisian. Because he was the last person known to have seen Carolyn and Mark, he is considered a person of interest in the disappearances, but there is no evidence to tie him to any crime. Carolyn and Mark's social security numbers have not been used since 1981. Foul play is suspected in their disappearances, which remain unsolved.
Number 5.
Cheek was last seen at approximately 11 p.m. on December 2, 1993, when one of his business associates dropped him off at the Crescent Center on Poplar and Ridgeway Streets, where his charcoal gray 1987 Acura Legend was parked. Cheek was intoxicated at the time. He had just finished eating dinner at the Cooker restaurant across the street. He has never been heard from again. Cheek's parents filed a missing persons report at 9 a.m. the next day. His suitcases were found unpacked at the home he'd just bought in the 6200 block of Heather Street in East Memphis, and towels his mother had placed on his bed prior to his trip had been moved. The garage door, which Cheek always kept shut, was left open. There was no sign of him at his residence. At 10:40 a.m. that day, his car was found abandoned in an industrial area at Crump Boulevard and Riverside Drive on the Delaware Street exit ramp, now called the Metal Museum exit. There were no signs of Cheek or any struggle near the car, and his loved ones cannot think of any reason why he would want to drive there. The location is near the Mississippi and Arkansas Bridge, which spans the Mississippi River. Cheek is described as a driven, successful, talkative person. He has a bachelor's degree from Southern Methodist University in Dallas, Texas, and a master's in business administration, MBA, from the University of Chicago. At the time of his disappearance, he was the chief financial officer of the Cates Company, a Memphis real estate firm, which was about to go public. The deal had consumed the majority of his time for months. He worked 18-hour days. It would have pushed his salary up to $110,000 and given him $2 million in stock options. Cheek took a 3-day business trip to Milwaukee, Wisconsin, Portland, Oregon, and Denver, Colorado to work out the deal, but it was unexpectedly delayed due to questions by the Securities and Exchange Commission, and Cheek took a late-night flight back to Memphis. He told friends that he had not slept for 3 days. Later, the deal was completed, and an audit of the business found no evidence of wrongdoing on Cheek's part, but because he was missing, he was never given the financial rewards he expected. Investigators are not sure what happened to Cheek. Authorities initially believed he took his own life by jumping into the Mississippi River, but an extensive search of the river did not reveal his body, and his loved ones do not believe he would have committed suicide. One theory is that he developed a mental disorder due to the stress of his job and may not recall his identity. Cheek had no history of mental illness prior to his 1993 disappearance. There were numerous reported sightings of him throughout the southern United States in the months after he went missing, but none of the accounts could be confirmed. His case remains unsolved, and his loved ones have never stopped looking for him.
Number 6.
Edward and his wife, Stephania, attended a cocktail party at the Sheraton Hotel in Chicago, Illinois on Friday, May 15, 1970. The party was sponsored by the Women's Auxiliary of the Beverage Institute, which Stephania was a member of. Other guests at the party stated Edward appeared to be ill and complained of being hungry, and Stephania was crying by the time they left. At 9:30 p.m., the Andresses left in their black and yellow 1969 Oldsmobile Sports Coupe with the Illinois license plate number BB9986. The parking garage attendant stated Edward was driving and hit the door on the way out. He had to back up and reposition the car to get out of the garage. The attendant saw Edward go the wrong way after he left, driving north in a southbound lane on Michigan Avenue. Neither Edward nor Sophia have been heard from again. It was not until the following Monday that the Andresses were reported missing. Sophia and Edward's co-workers became concerned because they failed to arrive at work. The police visited their home in Arlington Heights, Illinois, and found newspapers piled on the front lawn and letters accumulated in the mailbox. A neighbor had a key and admitted authorities to the residence. Everything inside was orderly and nothing appeared to be missing. There has been no activity on Edward and Stephania's stocks and bonds, bank accounts, and 14 credit cards since their disappearances. Edward was an accountant and semi-retired by 1970. Stephania was a credit investigator at a loan company. They had been married for 6 or 7 years. Both of them are described as hardworking, trustworthy individuals who did not drink heavily. The prevailing theory is that the missing couple was killed when their car drove off a bridge into the Chicago River. Police found a place on a bridge on Lower Wacker Drive where there were scrapes on a concrete pillar and skid marks on the road, but numerous searches of the river turned up no evidence. In 1980, a general cleanup of the Chicago River produced 12 automobiles, but none of them was Edward and Stephania's car. In 1994, an informant told investigators that Sophia and Edward had been murdered by a gang of young men. Their bodies were afterwards placed in their car, which was dumped in a shallow pond near Green Oaks in Lake County, Illinois. A search of the pond turned up no signs of a vehicle or bodies, however. Both of the Andresses cases remain unsolved. Arlington Heights police are investigating.
Number 7.
Tyahus was last seen leaving the Mariners Harbor Motel on Forest Avenue in the New York City borough of Staten Island on August 14, 1983. She lived in the hotel with her mother and 3 siblings, the family having moved there after getting burned out of their apartment. The Jacksons planned to relocate to the southern United States. At 1:30 p.m., while Tyahus's mother was asleep, another resident of the hotel sent Tyahus out to purchase chicken wings from the Crown supermarket in the 900 block of Richmond Avenue. Tyahus never returned to the hotel and has never been heard from again. Her mother woke up at 4:30 p.m. and, discovering her daughter had been missing for 3 hours, immediately called police. Tyahus's mother describes her daughter as streetwise and wary of strangers. She frequently went on errands in the city, sometimes with her sister or a friend and sometimes alone, and had been warned about predators. She has never been heard from again. Tyahus's mother and uncle both passed lie detector tests and are not considered suspects in her disappearance. Andre Rand, a mentally incompetent convicted child sex offender from New York, is a prime suspect in Tyahus's case. Photos of him are posted with this case summary. Tyahus disappeared 12 days after Rand's release from a New York prison. He had a campsite at the Baron Hirsch Cemetery less than half a mile from the Mariners Harbor Motel, and Tyahus's mother said she had seen a man matching his description loitering in the motel's parking lot. Rand is also believed to be connected to the 1972 disappearance of Alice Pereira, the 1978 disappearance of Ethel Atwell, and the 1984 disappearance of Henry Gafforio, among other missing persons cases. There is speculation that Rand may have been involved in the 1977 New York disappearance of Audrey Nierenberg as well. In 2004, he was convicted of kidnapping in the 1981 abduction of Holly Hughes. All of them vanished from the Staten Island area, with the exception of Nierenberg. Rand was previously convicted of the 1987 New York abduction of Jennifer Schweiger, a 12-year-old girl with Down syndrome, whose remains were discovered near his former campsite on the grounds of the now-defunct Staten Island Developmental Center, formerly known as the Willowbrook State School. Volunteers continue to search the abandoned property twice a year for evidence related to Rand's other alleged victims, but nothing has been discovered. The Staten Island Developmental Center is 2 miles north of the site of Tyahus's disappearance. Rand, whose birth name is Frank Ration, has maintained his innocence in all charges against him. Tyahus's case remains unsolved.